Today we're looking at reasons why cars lose power when you're driving along. We've got three main sort of popular reasons really, and we can see under the bonnet of this car exactly what we're talking about. The classic one is if the car is serviced regularly, the air filter, which is based here on the car, should look like that, but it gets all dirty and mucky and gets blocked, and basically it strangles the engine of air. That's your first thing. Also, we've got a fuel filter that lives just down here. Same thing, you get contaminated fuel from garage forecourts and it blocks with water and general dirt in there. Blocks it, a bit like this, restricts the fuel going to the engine. So that's one problem, blocked filters. The second problem is a catalytic converter, which all new cars have now. They have had them since about 1994, and it's basically your front exhaust box in your exhaust system has got this monolith inside which is made of ceramic, and it actually breaks up and can go through into the back box of the exhaust and block it, effectively strangling the exhaust, so it makes your car lose power. It can also become contaminated with oil and with fuel, and again can block it. So a catalytic converter, that's an expensive option, but nonetheless is quite a popular one. Finally, you can get the fuel tank breather pipe blocking up, and what that means is that as we draw fuel out of the tank to the engine, the breather doesn't allow air to go into the tank and replace the fuel, so you get a bit of an effect whereby if you imagine sucking on a plastic pop bottle and it collapses, that's the effect that we get with the fuel tank, and it reduces the amount of fuel that can come to the engine. Now you can diagnose that one really easily. So if you're driving down the road and your engine starts to lose power, if you stop, jump out of the car, undo the fuel filler cap, and if you get a big hiss and a rush of air going in, you know that you've got a breather problem on your fuel tank. So you've got three main problems there. So just to recap, check your filters, check to make sure your catalytic converter is okay, and finally check to make sure the fuel system isn't blocked or a blocked breather. And with those done, you should hopefully have happy motoring. I'll be back next week with more tips on how to keep your car going on the road. Well, a big business at the moment in garages are clutch cables or clutch problems on French cars, particularly the Peugeot range, Peugeot 306s, 406s, 206s, etc., and pretty much all of the Citroën range as well. And the problem being that your clutch seems to go. And it's a very common problem, similar part spin problem, a shared part, whereby a plastic clip that connects the clutch cable onto the pedal breaks. Now the clip itself is quite cheap, it's only about £6, but the problem, the actual call-out charge and the repair and the risk of getting a clutch sold to you that you don't need is avoidable. And it's actually quite a biggish job in some cases, because on the Peugeot range you can unbolt the pedal and sort of almost do it at the side of the road. On the Citroëns it's a workshop job where you've got to take the entire pedal box out and do a bit of grinding and drilling to replace it. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because you could quite easily be had by a garage, because if your clutch pedal goes to the floor, you could be sold a clutch unnecessarily. But if you know that this is going to happen to you at some stage in your car's life, then maybe you could get it replaced beforehand in the garage next time you're having a service. It should only take about an additional hour's labour, and I strongly suggest for £6 worth of part and an hour or so's labour on the service, you could save yourself considerable expense stuck at the side of the road. Now I've noticed whilst I've been driving this car that there's a horrendous clunk on it, and the owner clearly isn't very mechanically minded, and it's got this horrendous noise on the clutch pedal, if you can hear that. Now to an unsuspecting punter, I can imagine him taking this into the garage and getting the leg pulled a little bit to the tune of maybe a few £100 on something very interesting, but in reality all it needs is a quick tweak by hand. Now this is a Ford Maverick, but it's exactly the same pedal box on a Nissan Terrano, and every single one of these that I've driven, they've all done it, and it's really annoying. But I can imagine if you took it into a garage, you could possibly get your leg pulled. But if you watch this, you'll see how to repair it. All it needs is it just needs dragging over to the passenger side like that, and you'll see it's magically cured. So if yours is doing it, and I suspect it will be because every single one I've ever been in does do it, do that and you've magically repaired it. From time to time your radio will stop working and it will be very boring. What happens is if the battery gets disconnected or you flatten the battery for any reason, they lose their code, and the code is in, so that if the radio gets stolen, then a thief can't automatically just turn it on when they connect it up. Now then, you might not be aware of your radio code, so instead of having to put up with a horrible trip from Blackpool to Birmingham on a wet Sunday morning without any tunes, I suggest you find your radio code, and it'll either be in your glove box, or if you haven't got it because it's a second-hand car, you can quite simply nip down to your main dealers with some identification and the logbook, and they'll quite happily give it you from the parts department. And now, just to give you a quick demo of how easy it is to do yourself, is I've already found that my radio needs recoding. I've got my 4-digit number, so I'll quite simply code it in like this. And I hope no one's watching at home. 7283. And then I press the last digit and it should just burst into life, and there we are. So it's a 2-minute fix, but it can be a nightmare if you don't already know your number. When you take your car for an MOT, you don't know what it's going to fail on. A common thing these days are damaged windscreens. Now, if it's cracked, you may be covered on your insurance and get it replaced. But if it's scratched or marked, you definitely won't be covered, and it can be an expensive option if you've got to pay for one yourself. What we're going to do is have a look at how to polish one out and also show you how you can do it yourself at home. This car's got a bad scratch on the windscreen that you can see just here, and basically that's caused by a windscreen wiper that is faulty. What we're going to do is polish it out effectively, and I've got my polishing kit here. We've got a container of water that we're going to spray on it. You can see I've used a red pen to put some colour on the windscreen on the inside so I can see where I'm going, and then we've got a combination of water and some magic powder to mix up in this dish. We're going to make into like a paste, a runny paste, that we're going to soak this special magic flexible disc with, and we're going to apply the paste on the screen, and then we're going to hopefully sand it away or polish it away very, very carefully. Now then, we've got a couple of tips here. First of all, this is glass and it will break very, very easily. So much so I've broken these windscreens, particularly on these cars, by just sticking a mirror on the inside. And also, because the screen is laminated, we've actually got layers of glass and plastic. We've got to remember not to allow too much heat to build up from the actual polishing process, so we've got to apply a lot of water. It's a bit messy, and once I start, I'm just going to get stuck in and see how we go. Right, that should be done now, so we've got to now clear it off, check it, and see how we go on. So let's give it a good clean off, and hopefully the marks, the red felt tip's obviously still there, but the marks will hopefully have gone. And I don't know if you can see that, but I can certainly see there's no mark in there now at all. That'll pass an MOT. And all we've got to do is clear off the red felt tip, wash off the windscreen, clean it all up, and then charge the punter. Right, very often when you're going to buy a car, or if you see them driving down the road, you'll see that sometimes they smoke. And we've got good smoke and we've got bad smoke. White smoke you'll see early in the morning or on a foggy day, cars that have got like steam coming out. That's normally all right, but this car has got black smoke, as you can see. Right, that's lovely. That's not too bad either. That's a diesel, so it has got black smoke, and that's quite acceptable. If it's smoking too much, it's only adjustable, and it might even just be a blocked air filter. However, we've got blue smoke on this car, and you'll see that this is our enemy. So if you watch this as I rev it, that isn't good. And that's what I'm going to look at today and explain to you the different types of smoke, in particular blue, which is our enemy when you're buying a car, and you need to know what's good and what's bad. Now then, I've got a mock engine here, and I'm just going to talk you through very, very briefly a few components. In the cylinder block in this area, we've got pistons here that go up and down as I turn it round. Now, as they're turning up and down, we've got valves in our cylinder head that are also going up and down. Now then, we've got two possible causes of blue smoke. apart from the obvious that we hope you would have checked to make sure that the engine isn't overfull with oil, if it is a cylinder block problem with pistons, you've got to walk away. It's going to be very, very expensive to fix. Because if it is that problem, then what we've got is a piston. It's got piston rings on here. And what it means is those piston rings are either worn or broken, and it's going to cost a lot of money to repair it. So we want to walk away from the car if it's got a cylinder block smoke problem. Now, on the other hand, if it's in the cylinder head, and I'm going to tell you how to define the difference between them shortly, but if it's in the cylinder head, I'm going to show you how simple it can be to repair. Now, I've got a cylinder head that's off the car here, and I'm going to remove one of the valves. So I'm going to use a valve spring compressor, which I'll pop on here. I'll only take a moment to pull apart, and use my little magnet to pull out one of the collets, and then the other one. And we can see I can release this, and I can show you what a valve is. So we pop that there. And that is a valve. Now that valve, as we've already seen, goes up and down there, but we get oil actually running down past the valve, so we have a valve seal just fitted here, and you can see it's only made of rubber, it's flexible, and because that fits over the valve, it goes up and down, that wears, and that valve stem oil seal is the cause of a smoking engine when it's to do with the cylinder head. Now that seal on its own is about 20 pence, and you can see we've got 8 valves, so you haven't got a lot of money there. But the labour involved in actually repairing this, if it's a major strip down with the cylinder head coming off, can be very prohibitive to you. So what I'm saying is that the cylinder block problems, if it's smoking, walk away. If it's a cylinder head, it is repairable, and in fact, even though this cylinder head's off, on a lot of modern cars, you can actually replace this seal quite cheaply without having to remove the cylinder head. Now, all you need to know now is, how can I tell the difference between it being a head problem and a block problem? Well, it's simple. If it smokes all the time, walk away, because it's definitely in the cylinder block. If it only smokes on startup, then it's a cylinder head problem and can be repaired, sometimes quite cheaply. That would be up to you to check with a specialist to see how much it is. So hopefully with that information, you'll be able to go and buy a car quite safely, or even diagnose somebody else's that could be faulty. Right, a very common fault on cars is a knocking noise when you're going around corners, and you'll hear it quite often when you pull away from a junction and accelerate on full lock. Now that's usually a knocking drive shaft, and just to show you what a drive shaft is, we've got one here. Because all cars have drive shafts fitted, you can see that it goes from the wheel through to the gearbox and obviously drives the car along down the road. But more precisely, the noise will be the joint on the end of the shaft, which will be knocking. Now then, each shaft on a car has got sort of a wobbly bit at each end called a CV joint, and you can see that that allows the wheel to go up and down and also move around corners. Now we've got 3 stages to this knocking fault. The first stage is before it's even started knocking, in that what we need to do is check the drive shaft boot to see if there's any damage, and on this one there's a hole there, and you can see grease has started to come out of there, and water will also get in there, causing it to wear and causing it to knock. So the very first phase of the problem is to check the joints, and if it is damaged, then you'd fit a new boot, such as one in a kit here, and hopefully the problem will never occur. The second phase is once the joint has started to knock, hopefully we can cure it by, again, fitting one of these kits, but this time replacing the boot, but also packing it with grease again. So by squirting some grease into the knocking joint, very often if we pop that in there and we work it in and we rebuild it, quite often on a road test it'll stop knocking and we can get quite a lot more life out of the joint. Now the third stage of the problem is a worst case scenario, in that it might need a new drive shaft, or if you're lucky, it might be one that splits like this one does. Let's just have a look here. There, where the joint will come off, and you can just fit a new joint onto the shaft, which will keep costs down, because one of them can cost hundreds of pounds, whereas you can get a joint from about £50, so that's good. Now then, it's important to obviously listen to your car when it's making these noises, because a worst case scenario could be that if the knocking was left, the joint could come apart and it could damage your steering and your brakes and cause you to crash. So moving on from here, the very first thing you need to do on your car is to check to see if there's any damage before it gets to the knocking stage, and hopefully you can save yourself a few quid. Garages are forever getting called out to cars that are either stranded or people can't get into, and it's a very common fault. And I've chosen a Rover to show you this, but the actual fault is something to do with the Immobiliser. Now there's two main problems with the Immobiliser. The first one is that people let the battery go flat. The other one is that sometimes the car just fails to accept the frequency transmitted from the key fob. But there's a couple of things we need to do. When you fit in a battery, you've got to follow the correct procedure, and that would mean taking the battery out, fitting the new one, but before you fit the new one, you need to press the button down on a Rover for 5 to 10 seconds. You then release it, put the battery in, and when you zap it, the alarm and Immobiliser should operate correctly by unlocking the doors. If it doesn't, then there is a procedure that you can follow, and all Rovers and some other cars come with a 4-digit key code, which comes in your owner's manual in the glove box. If you've got it, it's very easy. So I'll give you an example of what to do. Take it, for example, that this car has got a 4-digit key code number of maybe 1212. We very simply put the key in the door, turn it to the left 1, and then to the right 2, and 1, and then 2. And that actually immobilises the Immobiliser, so it allows you to gain access and drive the car. But that's turned it off, and it'll only be reactivated either by initiating the key fob again or by flattening the battery or something like that. Now, that'll sort of get you mobile temporarily, but what my tip is maybe to go and get a battery fitted in the key fob before it goes flat. Follow the procedure, and that's then going to save you any problems of being stranded late at night or a call-out charge, maybe when it's very inconvenient. Now this is a brand new MGTF, and I'm sure you'll agree it's one of the best looking small cars, certainly convertibles on the road at the moment. But if you can't afford one of these, then you're going to be lumbered with one of the old models. And we've got some significant differences. On the new MGFs, they've got new dedicated suspension, whereas on the old ones, you're lumbered with the old Metro suspension. And because of that, you're going to suffer from excessive tyre wear. Now, there's nothing wrong with the vehicle, it's just that the Metro suspension was not designed to be hurtled down the road in a sports car. So what you need to be looking at when you're buying one of these is to make sure they've got plenty of tyre tread depth on them, because if they haven't, then you're certainly going to be having to shell out for a new set of boots very, very soon. But that's not the only problem you'll have. We've also got head gasket problems as well. Now, because this is a mid-engine motor car, it has a few more attendant problems than you'd normally get on a front-engine Rover. Although it's only the K-Series engine, quite a sporty one at that, the engine's in the back, except it isn't, because all we've got is like a space about the size of a letterbox to see through to the engine. And what that means is, to actually get at the head gasket, because these K-Series engines are definitely prone to going, you've got a whole load more stripping down. So before you start buying any parts, you're into near enough 8 hours just to do the head gasket. And then if the cooling system is all gummed up as well, then you've got mega problems, because the radiator's at the front, we've got long pipes going between the engine and the radiator, and it's a nightmare to do. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because of two reasons. First one is, if you're thinking of buying one, then you need to ask if the head gasket has been done recently, because if it hasn't, then you're going to have to budget for it being done within the next 12 months. If you own one and you've not had a head gasket fitted yet, then you better start saving now, because as sure as eggs is eggs, you're going to have a head gasket fitted to this motor car, and it is very, very expensive. And that finally leads me onto the hood, which is also a problem. Now the hood has got seals on both the actual hood and the top of the windscreen here, and these seals, as they get older, they perish and they leak in. Now we all know that convertibles leak water, but like, boy do these leak water. So you're going to have to budget for that. But the good news is that if you buy these seals, which will only cost for a full set hundreds rather than thousands, you could at least have a go at fitting these yourselves. The hood, however, is a totally different ball game, in that you're talking a lot of hours to do that. And the whole point of you sort of attempting a job like this is to stop it from leaking. So I'd probably recommend specialist help with the hood, but you could certainly have a go if these seals were perished at maybe replacing them yourself. So other than that, happy motoring. Well, have you ever heard of an Astra G? Because that's what this model is, and in fact you probably haven't heard of it, but us people in the trade, we have code names for them, or Vauxhall do. This model's an Astra G, the model before it was an Astra F, The Mark II, as you know it, was an Astra E, etc. So if you're ordering any parts or anything like that, it's handy to know that. But Astra Gs have got a problem on the headlamps at the moment, so much so that you'll find that from time to time the headlights will steam up and get condensation in them. Now, that's not a problem at the moment if your car's under warranty, because as part of the warranty job at the moment, Vauxhall will quite happily fit you a new set of headlights, but that's not the only problem. The problem is, because it's so aerodynamic and it does look quite good and almost BMW-like, it comes at a price. And that price is that we've got very, very close tolerances around the front end between the bonnet and wing and headlight. So much so that we've actually got to use some feeler gauges to measure the gap between the bonnet and the headlight to make sure it's set up correctly. If it isn't, then because of the aerodynamics, we get water going over the top of the headlight, underneath the bonnet and into it. Now, you might think, well, I've only got my car under warranty, so that's not a problem. But once the car's out of warranty, you don't want to be spending money every few months changing these. So I'm going to show you how you can rectify the problem if you've got this car and it's out of warranty. So we'll lift the bonnet up and we'll see how to adjust it on the stops. Now we can see what's happening underneath there, and you can see the two adjusters. It's very critical that we adjust both sides accurately, and it's trial and error. And you can see there's one adjuster there. We screw it out to lift the bonnet up, screw it in to move the bonnet down, and there's exactly the same thing over on this side here. And with the bonnet up, we can see the actual seal on top of the headlight, and it's designed so the bonnet squashes down on there, make it nice and tight, because as it is, water can get up and inside the headlight, and you can actually see we've got condensation on this headlight here already, so this is going to need changing. Now, because it's made to such fine tolerances, it's pretty critical, but you can see that it is avoidable by having it adjusted correctly. So if your car is out of warranty, you could maybe adjust it yourself and have a play, and hopefully save yourself some astronomical bills at the garage. Right, today we're looking at Land Rovers, and this is an early 70s Series 3. It's in really good condition because they go on forever, but I've got a couple of tips to help you out when you're buying one. Now then, in the early 70s, this model came out, and this is about a 72, and this is what's called a Series 3. The model before this was a Series 2A, and the reason I'm telling you this is it's quite significant, because on the Series 3s, they actually started making the chassis out of much thinner material. Now, what I mean by a chassis is that the reason you see Land Rovers in so many different models, shapes, sizes, sort of army vehicles, fire engines, and vehicles like this on the road, is because they have like a steel chassis, and then they bolt the body on top. Now, this chassis is usually very strong, but on this series of Land Rovers, like I say, Land Rover went for a slightly thinner metal, and they do suffer from heavy corrosion. So you're looking all along the chassis, but in particular, these outriggers here, which you can see, and they do go terribly, terribly rusty. So this is something you've got to look out for. Now, a Land Rover is just like a big Meccano set, and everything just bolts on. So you can repair most things at home, but the chassis, that's something slightly different, and you may need professional help with that. So if you're thinking of buying one, or you've got one, make sure that the chassis area, front, back, and the outriggers are in good condition. Otherwise, you could be into hefty money. Or another tip could be to either buy a slightly earlier Land Rover with a thicker chassis, or a later one, a late 80s when they went onto the 110 series, or the 90s, which are slightly more modern, and again, they went onto galvanised chassis, which should in theory last forever. So that's my tip of the week. When I was a 6-year-old kid growing up in the 1970s, I remember going on holiday in a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, and we left it parked up in a secure compound for a couple of weeks. Upon our return, we found something horrible had happened. The wheel trims had been stolen, and the windscreen wipers had been tied in a knot. And that left a lasting impression on me for the rest of my life, and that is that Rolls-Royces are always going to be expensive to run. But nowadays, you can actually buy them in your magazines and stuff for less than £5 and I've seen them as cheap as £3. And they are good fun to drive. So we've got a couple of tips for you. First of all, make sure everything works on it, make sure it's not smoking, and that the gearbox operates okay. If they don't, then walk away. Secondly, and this is your most important thing, they go absolutely as rotten as a pear at the bodywork. And just to help you remember what goes rotten on them, think of wings, doors, sills and floors, and bonnets and boots and roofs and everything else. And you can see down here we've actually got the wing, but it's all gone really, really rotten. You can see it's falling to bits. We've also got big holes in the floor pans, which you can see. The sills are rotten, and also on this the back wheel arches are as well. Now, they are actually really, really, really good to drive, and they're a bit of a laugh. A bit 70s, and I think they're good, but hey, I listen to Sergio Mendes in my Alfa Sud. But just to give you an idea of some costs, You might pick one up for £3,000 to £5,000, but you could double that in restoration costs just to get it back on the road. And give you an example of repair prices, a back wheel arch repair panel is available, but you're talking the cheapest you'll get one is £350. So before you know it, you're going to have a lot of money in these things, so just bear that in mind. But don't be put off, but just bear in mind that it could cost you a lot of money on bodywork to get it back on the road. Today we've got a selection of alloy wheels, some of which are repairable, some aren't, and they're all in various different states. So I'm going to just show you around them. We've got all these down here, and they're actually all repairable. We've got a classic one off a TVR, an RS2000, an RS Turbo, and another Ford one there. But they are all repairable. This one here off a motorbike is dented here, which you can see, that is also repairable. However, we've got one off a car that's dented here, and that's scrap basically. And this one here is also repairable. But when I say repairable, you'll see that basically alloy wheels suffer from corrosion, and you don't have to send them away and spend hundreds of pounds having them refurbished. You can actually do it yourself. So I've got two main tips today. The first one is cleaning them. Alloy wheels look awful with brake dust on, road grime, tar, things like that. And I've got one here that I've had a bit of a play with. I've tried alloy wheel cleaner on it and it's not actually had much of an effect, but what I tend to use is actually, and don't laugh, oven cleaner. And if you spray it on, follow the instructions on the tin, but using it on the alloy, it actually brings off all this brake dust and grime. And as you can see, after 5 minutes work, what looks to be a scrap wheel and needs respraying has actually come up really clean. But obviously, always follow the instructions for safety on the tin. So that'll go again. This one is suffering really, really badly from corrosion. You can even see we've got bits of silver paint that come off. So I've chosen this to show you how easy it is to refurbish them. And I've sectioned off one part of this wheel with just some masking tape, and I've used simple products that have cost me less than £20. And what I've done is I've rubbed it down in 5 minutes with some rubbing down paper. I've masked it up, I've put some primer on, some wheel silver and some lacquer, and I think I've got pretty good results in just 5 minutes. So the reason I'm emphasising that is because if you spend a bit more time, like a couple of hours, you can actually refurbish a wheel like this at home yourself very cheaply and get very, very good results. So top tips for alloy wheels: don't throw them away, don't spend a lot of money, but maybe have a bit of a play at cleaning them properly, and then if you feel really confident, have a go at respraying them yourself. But another tip is if you are going to spray them, take them off the car so that you don't get overspray on your brakes, and if you get any paint on your tyres, you can just clean it off with some thinners. This week we're looking at brake light problems on cars, because every month hundreds of accidents are caused by them not operating correctly. Now there's three main problems with brake lights. They either don't work at all, they stay on all the time, or they operate sort of dimly so you can't tell the difference between your brake lights and your actual tail lights. So I'm going to show you hopefully what the problems are, and maybe so you can have a go at fixing them at home on your own car. So the first thing we're going to do is assume that the brake lights are not working at all. And so we'd look in the back, remove the bulb from the holder and have a look at it, and we'd check the filament inside to see if it looks okay, and it does in this case. So the next thing we'd do is we'd actually check with a simple test light to see if we've got power coming through to the bulb here. Whilst we're in here, we're also checking multi-plugs and wires to make sure we've got no corrosion and good connections there, because that can be a problem. If we think that side is okay, we're then going to move inside the vehicle and have a look down at the brake pedal where we've got the brake light switch, and we're going to check to make sure that's connected and that it's operating okay. So we'll have a look there. Now the next part of the testing is inside here. On the pedal, the brake pedal, we've got a little switch which I have removed, but before I removed it I made sure that the wires were connected to the terminals. We're then going to test it with a simple multimeter, and we're checking it just for continuity with them connected and seeing if we get a reading or not. It's either right or it isn't. If it is okay, in this case it is, I could refit that, make sure the wires are connected back up, and then go and check the fuses under the bonnet to see if there are any blown. So that's what we're going to do now. Now the fuses that we're looking at on this car are under the bonnet, but on some cars, maybe the one that you own, they are inside, maybe under the dashboard somewhere. The fuse box is over here, and what we're looking for is basically a fuse that's blown, and you can see on these fuses they have a little element inside that you can see when they're okay, and that blows when there's a fault on the circuit. Now if you check all your fuses and you either replace them or you find that they're all okay, your brake lights at this stage will now work and your lack of brake lights problem will be cured. So with all that done, hopefully all your brake light problems will be cured, and I'll be back next week with more motoring tips for you. Running a Vauxhall these days certainly means that we've got some consistency across the parts bin these days, which is good because that keeps costs down for parts. But what it also means is that when you've got a fault on a part, that it hassles you across the range. So even though we've got a Cavalier here, the problem I'm going to tell you about now to do with the clutch will affect you equally on an Astra or a Corsa or a Vectra. And the simple problem on these is that the clutch cables are very prone to snapping where it connects to the clutch pedal. The clutch cable connects between the gearbox and the clutch pedal, and it obviously allows you to, by pressing the pedal, to operate the clutch and engage gears and disengage gears. What the problem is with this vehicle is that the clutch cable at the very end of it has a little piece of metal shaped a bit like my finger that hooks onto the pedal, and that's pretty weak, and after time it will break. So if you do run a Corsa or an Astra or a Cavalier, you're going to come unstuck at some point. But the good news is that the cables are very, very cheap, and you can actually buy a cable for around about £10 from your local car accessory shop, and you don't need any tools at all actually to fit them. So what my tip is, if you have one of these vehicles, is to simply get yourself a cable from a car accessory shop and have a go at fitting it, and failing that, maybe next time your car's in for a service, get them to fit one, and that'll at least save you the inconvenience and the cost of either a breakdown or being stranded somewhere without a clutch. This week we're looking at scratch repairs on cars, and in fact I've got an email off Donna Moore who's got a Chrysler Voyager with similar scratches to this. Now, rough rule of thumb, if the scratch is bigger than an A4 piece of paper, it's not something that you can repair at home and it needs doing in a professional body shop, and in this case it's likely that the whole side of the car is going to need repairing. However, we have got a car over here that we can do some repairs on, and we've got a car here that the edge of the door is scratched, and we're going to look at touching that in. We've also got some scratches on the sill as well that hopefully we're going to spray. So as you can see down here, we've got all these scratches, and these are caused by scuffs over the years, and they're quite common on any car this age. Because it's black, we can touch it in quite easily, and we're going to spray this just using our trusty old spray can, and it's a case of getting in here and just doing some nice even strokes. Now, I've previously cleaned this, so I know there's no oil or anything on it. I'll do that bit there as well. Well, that's the spraying done. Now we've got some touching up, and all I've done is spray the same paint into its lid, and I've got a kiddie's touch-up brush, and we're going to do this edge of the door, which is a bit of a classic scrape, and so it takes a bit of concentration, so see how we go. Now, what we don't want to do is put too much paint on in one go, otherwise it looks really ugly, but just gentle strokes like that, and hopefully we'll manage to do it with just the amount of paint that is on the brush, and it should look pretty okay like that. So there you go. So that's all there is really to little repairs. So we've done some spraying and some touching up, and you can really give your car a good makeover for, in our case, less than £10. So that's it for here, and I'll be back next week hopefully solving some more motoring problems for you. See you then. Well, we've got a Ford Fiesta, Britain's best loved small car at some time or other, and they're still very popular in the old car world because they're made up to N-Reg, so they still look quite modern. They're very, very good, they're very trusty, very hardy, but they do have a few gremlins, and one of them is one that happens to every single Fiesta that I've come across. That's with a rear wiper, where it's got a mind of its own. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and I'm going to show you how you can fix it at home very cheaply. Now, a very modern technique on cars today is to do away with wiring, to make them simpler and cheaper to make, and Ford have actually done away with the earth wire going between the car body and the tailgate, and the system's earth through the tailgate hinge here. And as you'll agree, I think that it's not an ideal situation, because with the tailgate moving up and down, you get movement, and also you can see it's very rusty, this, and this is our exact problem. This causes the bad connection because we've got to get an electrical connection between this part of the hinge and that one. And I've removed this pin already, which just taps out with a hammer. And if I do that, you can get a better idea of what we've got to do, because for this repair, it's not brain surgery by any means. All we do is we take 10p worth of emery cloth, and we just rub these until they're nice and shiny, nice and clean. You get all this rust off. We pop some grease on there as we put it back together, and if we build it up, that will have got rid of the electrical gremlin completely. Might happen again 2 years down the road or something like that, but as you can see, it's very repeatable and easy to do. Now, this problem drives you mad because I've had horrendous problems with these trying to find out what it was, and I know of other mechanics that have as well. So if you've got a Ford Fiesta and the rear wiper isn't working, and I can assure you it will stop working at some time, you can very easily repair the bad earth connection between the tailgate and the body by cleaning up the contacts on the hinge. So if you've got that problem, don't spend any money, have a go yourself, and I'm sure you'll come up trumps with a working wiper again. Today we're looking at Rover K-Series engines, and to show you this I've got a Rover 200, 400 series car here. Well, this K-Series engine is actually a specially designed engine which is fitted right across the Rover range, from MGFs, big Rovers, little Rovers, K-Trims use it, Lotus use it. It's a very, very good engine, but it does have a problem, and this engine is actually designed very cleverly in that it's made up out of different sandwich layers, bits of engine, and it has these really long bolts that go from top to bottom. And it's quite an unusual design, and it's the only type of engine in a car today that is that design. But it has a major problem, and that is the head gasket problem. Now, the engine is made up of different parts, as I said, and the top bit is the cylinder head, where the valves are, and the lower down bit is the cylinder block, and in between those we've got this gasket that seals the oil galleries and the water galleries and the compression, and they're prone to failing on K-Series engines. Now, this is the tip. You can't really stop yours from failing at the moment. However, when you come to get it repaired, you could get a new modified Rover gasket to fit to it, because Rover have recently brought this out with special oil seals on that will hopefully prevent it from happening again. So you don't necessarily have to take your Rover to a Rover dealer's to get this part fitted, but do insist at your local garage, if your head gasket does fail, that you do get one of these modified items fitted. That way, hopefully, you'll only be getting the job done once. Right, I'm going to show you my ace creation, and it's actually a wind blocker that you'll have seen before on Porsches and BMWs. I wanted one for this, and the cheapest I could find one was about £150. So I've had a go at making one, and it's actually very effective. So my tip of the week, so to speak, is basically how to enhance your MX-5 for about £4. All I did was made a cardboard cutout of the shape of the seats, and took it down to my local joinery shop, got them to make a frame, wooden frame out of MDF, but in two halves, and in between the two halves I simply sandwiched some garden netting, which looks very effective, in between it, glued it together with some silicone, and then sprayed it matte black. So if I had to buy all those parts, it would have cost me about £4. It actually fits onto two pivot points that are already on the car, so I've not had to make any hinges or anything, and so far everybody that's seen it hasn't managed to notice that it's sort of homemade. So bearing in mind one would cost you £150, you're certainly going to cut out a lot of the buffeting. And the buffeting is caused by the wind, like blowing over the windscreen, you're blasting along, and get a bit of a vacuum in here. So that is essential, you know, if you want to go at speeds over 40 miles an hour and keep your hairdo in place. So I think you should have a go and see if you can come up trumps like I did. Welcome to the world of Volkswagen transporters. Now, these things have been around for a right old age, certainly before the start of time, and they'll probably be around long after you and I have gone. But even though they have been around for donkey's years, it's only just now that we're starting to get this particular problem on the 5-speed gearboxes, which is fitted across the range. So if you've got a petrol, a diesel, an air-cooled, a water-cooled, this problem is going to affect you at some point. Now, on the 5-speed gearboxes, we've got this problem whereby the gear lever is sort of here, and the gearbox is all the way back here. So we've got this enormous linkage that connects them, and that takes its toll on the mechanics of the gearbox. Now, what the problem is that the selector fork inside the gearbox, which kind of fits over all the gears and moves backwards and forwards, is wearing now. And previously they haven't worn. It's not a normal problem. So when you strip the gearbox down, and I know a couple of people that have stripped them down 3 or 4 times and not been able to fix it, you must replace the selector fork or check it for wear. Otherwise, you'll be driving yourself crackers by getting it rebuilt, driving it, it'll still jump out of gear or still grind, and it won't solve your problem. So that's my tip basically on these vehicles at the moment, because there's loads of them around in campers, caravannettes, minibuses. They're just all over the place, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be driving for years to come once the gearbox is repaired. So remember, selector fork. Right, today we've got a Volvo 240. They come in different shapes like saloons, estates and coupes, and they've got 2 main problems with them that will affect you if you're an owner of one. One is that the rear tyres wear out excessively, quicker than a racing car on a Sunday afternoon. But the main problem is under the bonnets, in that they develop a bit of a water leak, and it's quite a common problem right across the range, so I'm going to show you what it is and what to do about it. It's actually the water pump which is buried down here, but I've got one that I prepared earlier, and you can see that inside it goes really sort of manky, and they spring a leak. Now, if you check your water on a weekly basis, you'll notice whether or not it's starting to leak. And that's my tip, to check the water regularly. If it has got a leak, you need to get this replaced, because if the water runs out of the engine, it can overheat, causing serious engine damage. Now then, if you can't see a water leak, the sensible person that owns one of these would maybe nip along to your garage and get it pressure tested with one of these little devices. And then if it is leaking, you can get a new water pump fitted, and hopefully it'll cost no more than about 65 quid. If it isn't leaking, then you're going to have to start saving up, because you're going to have to buy one sooner or later. And with respect to the tyres, just check your tyre pressures on a weekly basis. This week we're looking at rusty cars, and in particular we're going to look at what's okay rust and what is bad rust on cars. Now, most cars are made of steel, and so that means that if the metal of the bodywork is exposed to water and air, it will corrode. So we generally paint cars to protect them, and in fact modern cars are actually Zintek coated to give them further protection against the elements. So with that knowledge, you can predict where things are going to go rusty, particularly if they're exposed to accident damage and day-to-day wear and tear. So you can see on here, it's had a bit of a bump, the metal's exposed and it's going rusty. So that's not too good. But we've also got rust on cars that's okay. And if we look at things like engines and gearboxes, which are made of like really thick metal, that's kind of cosmetically not very nice, but there's no problems whatsoever with the corrosion on large articles like that on the car. However, if we look at cars maybe that are starting to go a little bit frilly around the edges from stone chips, like on wheel arches and on doors and things like that, that's not very good, and that left will go into a hole. However, corrosion underneath cars and the body parts, if it's left and it goes into holes, that can be very expensive, and also it'll fail an MOT. Because any corrosion that goes into a hole that's within 30 centimetres of a structural mounting point, maybe to do with the brakes or suspension, will fail an MOT. And any repairs to those areas must be seam welded, and that's particularly expensive on things like classic cars. Now, if you're buying a car, any car pre-1990 has pretty much got hidden rust on it. Anything after that, they're very, very well protected and do last a lot longer. But if you do find any corrosion on a modern car, then you can suspect that maybe it's had some accident damage at some point and not been repaired very well. But just bear in mind that if you are going to buy a car, that maybe any corrosion that you do find, you maybe get a quote for to make sure it's not too expensive, because it is very, very dear to repair. I'll be back next week with more top tips to keep your motors running. We've got a share of Cosworth here, and they all sound like this at some point in their life. So have a listen. We're listening for a knocking noise. So if you have a listen, you just hear that tapping sound. Yeah, that sounds pretty rough to me. Okay, Phil, knock it off, please. Right, all Sierras have problems in their life because they're designed to be thrashed on the road. Now then, this engine actually blew up a couple of months ago and was rebuilt, but they use second-hand pistons. Now that saves a lot of money, because a new piston for one of these is about £200. But, and this is the big but, if you're going to rebuild one of these engines, to do it with second-hand parts costs £1,200, and it's not right. To do it with brand new parts, it would have been £2,000. Now I can see you sort of saying, hang on a minute, £2,000 is a lot more than £1,200. But what is the point of spending 1,200 quid and having it still knocking and sounding rough? For the sake of £800 more, you can have it absolutely brand new and supersonic again. So if you're not going to rebuild it properly, don't bother at all. This week I've got an email off Adrian in Wharton, who's got a problem with his car not starting. So I've got a car similar to his over here, so we'll have a look to see what's wrong with it. Now the problem that Adrian's got with his Citroen is quite a common one. It's a diesel and he has problems starting it sometimes in the morning. Now he also tells me that if he parks it on a hill with either reversed up or backed up, it makes a difference to his starting. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today, because this could be happening on your car. Basically, a diesel needs fuel to start, but on this type of fault, we've got some leak-off pipes that perish and fail, which I've got one here. And these pipes are connected on the injectors underneath here, and they suck air in overnight. So if you sort of drive up a hill with your engine up in the air like that, the fuel in your injectors can leak back to your fuel tank. So when you come and start the car in the morning, it won't, and you've got a load of faffing around to get it to work. However, if you reverse up the hill so your engine is down and your fuel tank is up, The fuel can't drain from the engine back to the tank, so therefore it will start. And it's actually a really simple repair, but you could get your leg pulled in a garage. So I'm going to show you what to do now. So these pipes here connecting the injectors are what I'm talking about, and basically they perish with age and they suck air in, and you can quite simply pull them off and replace them with a new one. And a packet of new hose like this you can get from a car accessory shop for about £5, and you quite simply get it in a long length, take your old pipe off, cut the new one to length and refit your new one, and that will actually repair it and you will have no more problems. And this is a problem on Vauxhalls, Citroens, Peugeots, Rovers, right across the range, and you can diagnose it yourself by doing the parking on the hill test and see if it makes a difference. So hopefully we'll have cured this for Adrian, and we'll be back next week hopefully to cure some more of your faults on your cars. The Toyota Yaris is a fantastic small car, and I can't really fault it, apart from its unusual ground clearance. It's great round town, it's good, and on the motorway it's not too bad either. But one thing that's foxing me is these door seals at the bottom of the window, at the top of the door, where no matter how much you push them down, they keep popping back up again when you put the window up and down. Now I've also noticed this on other Yaris's parked around and ones that have come into the garage. Now I've checked at the dealers and they're quite happy to change them under warranty if the car is less than 3 years old, so it's clearly a problem. So if it's happening on your car and it's driving you mad, I suggest you get them changed rather than just keep trying to push them down. And if it's out of warranty, you might have to shell out a few pounds. But other than that, enjoy. I like an old friend in that I can rely on them and they don't let you down. And I even remember as a young boy hanging around car auctions that traders used to say, buy a Nissan, son, because they'll always get you home. And they did. But I'm sorry to say that Nissan Micra K11s have got a slight incontinence problems in the back wheels, and it's something we're going to look at. The brakes on the back of the Nissan Micra are brake drums and shoes, and they're operated by the wheel cylinder, and it's this little baby that's starting to leak brake fluid. Now ultimately that'll lead to brake failure because all your fluid is going to run out, but long before that happens it would get picked up on a service or by the low brake fluid light on the dashboard. Now if your car is up to 3 years old, you'll get replaced under warranty, but if it's over that you're going to be shelling out yourself. So the sooner you look at these the better, so that you can maybe get away with just replacing the cylinder before the brake fluid has attacks the linings. Because brake hydraulics are a safety related item, I don't recommend that you mess around with this at home, but it's not that big a job to take into a garage and pay for. So don't lose faith in the old Micra, because remember, it is an old friend after all. When I was a young boy growing up in the 1970s, the only people that had a Porsche 911 were rich people. Certainly by the 80s, a lot more people had them, high-powered yuppies and things around town. By the 90s, they'd become a bit stale from my point of view, in that they were a bit of a well-worn cliche, and as far as I was concerned, the equivalent to a grown-up XR3i. Now that we've come into the new decade, they are the height of coolness, and I'd certainly put them in my list of the ultimate 5 cool cars, along with Aston Martin, Lotus and Alfa Romeo. But they can be cool for the wrong reasons. Now the Porsche 911 doesn't have a traditional cooling system like most cars on the road, in that most cars on the road have a radiator with water in and antifreeze and hoses, whereas the Porsche is what we call air cooled, and that relies on a fan to draw cold air into the engine bay and take away the hot air. Now that system works brilliantly because Porsche have got it off to a fine art. However, the Achilles heel of this vehicle is the heating of the cabin, because on a normal car we'd be able to pipe hot water inside the car under the dashboard to a little radiator and then blow it either to the windscreen or to your feet. With the Porsche we're relying on air being drawn from the engine bay through a heat exchanger. Now the heat exchangers are buried underneath the car, but we can have a quick look under the bonnet to see what happens. Now the heat exchangers actually take the heat from the exhaust manifold and duct it inside, and with time they corrode and they finally give up the ghost. Now if you look in the book, it only actually gives you 3 hours to change these, but you're not going to get any change out of 1,500 quid to have the job done. So if you are test driving one of these, or if you've got one, always make sure it's got a good heater and that you're getting plenty of heat out, because if you're not, you're going to have to start saving up. And although you may have the hottest car in the block, you could end up with a cold shoulder for the wrong reasons. Today we're looking at reasons why sometimes your steering wheel can sort of wobble about when you brake. And the main reason for that, and there are a couple of reasons, but the main reason is because we've got worn brake discs. And brake discs on cars actually work similarly to bicycle brakes. So if this disc is worn or has got a bit of a wobble on it and moves around, that's what you can feel on your steering wheel when you apply the brakes. Now you can easily test this at home with some very simple tools, in fact a biro. And with the wheel removed, you can actually place the biro on the brake caliper here, so it's very, very close to the disc, so it's just kind of just touching it. Then if you turn the disc around, you can see if the pen touches the disc. Now, if the pen intermittently touches the disc, you can then see that the brake disc is warped and therefore needs replacing. But we always fit them in pairs, so you'd put 2 on this in this case. The other reason, if it's not the brake discs that are warped, could be a worn tyre. So we'll pop it on, because what we'll do is we'll put the tyre on, spin it round and have a look. So here goes. Right, the next thing we're checking for with brake judder is to see if the actual tyre is out of shape or badly worn that's going to cause this judder. So what we do now is, by looking at the tyre, we can now spin it round and see if it's got a wobble at all. And what I'm doing is I'm actually focusing on a fixed point on the ground and then looking at the edge of the tyre just to see if it is wobbling at all. If it is, then you've confirmed the fact that your tyre is causing your steering wheel to have a bit of a wobble when you brake. To confirm it, what we could do is swap the front tyres and put them on the back of the car, the back one's on the front, and then if it eliminates it, you know that that is your problem. Then you'd have to replace the tyres with some new ones. If it's not that, and it's still doing it, then the next thing we'd do is actually check for wear in the steering or suspension components. And we can do that quite easily by getting hold of the wheel and feeling for play, and you can see there's actually a bit of play in there somewhere, and possibly that way as well. But I'd say that that play that we can see there is probably the cause in this case, because the brake disc was okay and the tyre was okay. You've now diagnosed roughly the area where the problem on the car is, and if you can't fix it yourself, at least you've got an idea of what you're going to be paying for in the garage. I'll be back next week with more top tips to help you and your motoring. Well, today we're looking at a Rover 214, but this applies to 216s, 400 series, all sorts of different Rovers with this K-series engine in it. And the problem with this car is, well, it's got the 214 shuffle basically, in that you drive along down the road and when you change gear, it'll sort of give it a bit of this, and then it'll drive perfectly normally. Doesn't matter what gear you're in or anything like that. And it's actually quite a common problem that Fox's mechanics no end. It's even, I know in the early days, it's certainly Fox main dealers. So much so they were fitting ECUs, fuel injection systems, all sorts of stuff. But if your car's doing it, it can be repaired at your house for less than £10. And it's as simple as this, look at this. We've got the distributor cap and rotor arm here at the end of the engine. And this is quite a common problem on cars, but the symptoms are just different on this. On the distributor cap, we've got this centre brush here, which wears out, which sort of burns out basically. And when it burns out, the car should stop, but it doesn't. It keeps running perfectly normally. And just the combination of driving and engine revs and load on the engine when you change gear brings this problem to light. So if your car does do it, and I can assure you if it's not done it yet, it will do it sometime, then you need to go down to your car accessory place, get a distributor cap and a rotor arm, pop them on and it'll magically cure it. So it's quite a simple repair that you can undertake yourself, and don't be fooled into spending money on anything more expensive than that. This week we're looking at common clutch problems that vehicles suffer with. Clutch problems fall into 4 main areas. The first one being total failure, whereby it might mean that you've got to take the gearbox out and replace the whole clutch assembly. The second category after total failure is a slipping clutch, and a slipping clutch is caused mainly by a clutch cable being out of adjustment, because as the clutch wears it needs adjusting, and we can do that quite simply here on this part of the cable with a pair of pliers and a spanner. The third category is clutch drag, whereby you're struggling to maybe engage gear, or it might grind going into reverse. Now that's usually a problem on hydraulic clutches, whereby maybe you've got a hydraulic leak, like clutch fluid leaking maybe from the master cylinder or from the slave cylinder on the gearbox. You could check the level, but basically you're going to need a new hydraulic part for that part of the clutch. The third category of clutch problems is clutch judder, and we get clutch judder because of oil on the clutch. which is usually leaked onto it, maybe from the engine or the gearbox. Clutch judder is also caused by sometimes a faulty engine mounting. Now that would need attending to if that was the case, because your engine could drop out if you don't. But if it's just clutch judder, and that means when you lift your clutch off, you're kind of getting a bit of juddering as you take away maybe from a junction, then if you can live with it, I'd suggest you do that. Because to repair it, you're going to have to take the gearbox and the clutch assembly and everything out anyway. So if you can live with that, fine, you're not going to do any harm. So they're your main sort of 4 areas of clutch failure, really. I'll be back next week with more top tips on how to maintain your car.